Hello and welcome back to the Screen Society podcast, a podcast that covers all things TV, movies, and everything you get on your screen. I'm your host Logan, and today we are back talking Shrinking season three, episode 3. That was almost a tongue twister, almost got me. But I hope you all are having a great day so far. Thanks for jumping back in and listening to this episode. I'm excited to jump into what I think was a good episode, but not a great episode. I think that it was short, but it didn't have as many powerful moments. I think that a couple of the other episodes have had so far, and still a good one. It was an 8.1 out of 10 on IMDb. I think people enjoyed it, but it was not the pinnacle of this show. I will say I didn't really have any kind of critiques. I do think sometimes the humor didn't hit as much as I'd liked, but for the most part, I enjoyed the episode. I'd probably give it around an 8 as well. But let's get into it. D-Day is what this episode was called. It aired on Wednesday, February 11th, 2026, 35 minutes long. The synopsis: Jimmy and Liz show up for Brian and Charlie when Ava goes into labor. Sean reconnects with his ex, Marisol. Zach Braff is the director. He is from Scrubs, and Scrubs is getting made ready to make its return. So it's funny because, and I've talked about this, I think, on the last episode, but I love Scrubs. I love Ted Lasso. I watched some of Cougar Town. I've seen some of it, but with Scrubs and Ted Lasso being two of my favorite shows ever, and then you get Shrinking, who a lot of the writers and people working on this show are also the ones that worked on those shows. I love, love Bill Lawrence and crew and the groups making this. And you have Jason Segel also, who was on How I Met Your Mother, which is another one of my favorite shows. So you got all these Logan favorites or people's favorites working together, and it's hard to miss, I think, for a lot of these guys. So or guys and gals. So let's dive in. Let's get into the episode. And writers Bill Posley and Sasha Garin, and we got a surprise appearance. I knew he was going to be on the season as Jimmy's father, but Jeff Daniels, who plays Jimmy's father, Randy, is right on the start of this episode, right in it. He is father to Jimmy, to um, grandpa to Alice, and they're talking about the fact that Jimmy goes, you want any more beers before you go? And and he's like, no, I thank you for this red hot chili pepper black whatever White Claw. And Jimmy makes a comment of like, lucky for there to be a car show around in Irvine because you don't ever really come around. Is basically what Jimmy's insinuating, is that we might have a little bit of an absent father here. And I'm interested to see if I think we are getting more episodes with Jeff Daniels in it as Randy. So I'm interested to see how they build out Randy and Jimmy's relationship. Maybe explanation somewhat of like when Jimmy loses Tia, how he interacts with Alice, and there is a little bit of that somewhat, I think, because he didn't really have a father figure around, so he doesn't really. He's kind of learning as he goes, because it does sound like Randy was pretty absent throughout his childhood, and even if he wasn't like gone, he was just not as involved with Jimmy. And Randy's just talking about the car show, more interested in that aspect of it. And um, Alice talking to Randy, and I think that there is a true and genuine attempt to try to connect. I think feels a lot closer to Randy because Randy seems to have at least been around a little bit more now and a little bit more of a grandfather type figure than even he was as a father figure for Jimmy. And I think that Randy's like, "Oh, you're going to Wesleyan," and Alice is like, "Yeah, I'm going to Wesleyan." And he goes, "Give you a fist bump. Do kids still do that?" And yeah, they give a fist bump, but Randy calls Jimmy Jimbo, and he's like, "Jimbo? Nobody calls me Jimbo." And Alice can just tell that there is some tension there. And then Randy asks about, are there any girls in your life? And then Alice mentions Sophie, and he's like, "Oh, Sophie, huh?" And then mentions other girls as well, and, and they're like, "Oh, you're a pimp, huh?" And so Jimmy's like, "No, this is making me really uncomfortable." And she goes, "I just, he said that I'm just not ready. I'm just trying to always figure out, how to move on. And then Randy kind of makes fun of him, like his dad makes fun of him because he's like, Jimmy never really understood how to ask people out and really didn't know how to handle the girls, the ladies in his life. And so Jimmy leaves the table. Alice is like, Grandpa wanted to ask you something about graduation. And then Jimmy's like, hey, can I see you in the kitchen before Randy can answer that? Pretty sure she's going to extend an invitation to him. And then Jimmy's like, why are you trying to butter up your grandpa? He's not, he's never around. Like, what's going on? And, you know, I think Jimmy feels that either Randy is just not as interested in a like he is interested in a relationship, but also it's complicated for Jimmy to have him around. Like Jimmy doesn't really like that Randy's much around. And Alice is like, I get that, but he's also my grandpa. I'm trying to make good with him. And he's like, and it's interesting because you had that dynamic of him and Lewis, right? Where I mean, Lewis would be a person that I would never have thought in a million years that Alice and Jimmy would want anything to do with. And they let him into their lives and like would have been in their lives had he stuck around. But here is somebody that they're trying to also make a same kind of situation, just trying to make amends for the past that has hurt them. And yet this time Jimmy's like, I, I don't really want my father around. I like that you're trying to build a relationship, Alice, but like it's really tough for me because of what I've experienced with him. And she goes, no, I get it. I understand. And then he comes in and is like, all right, I'm gonna head out. But it was very interesting that they played it this way because it seems like Jimmy is not willing to let his father into his life because it does feel like any time when he let him into his life, he disappointed him or he left whenever he thought things were going well. Very absentee father of him. But then we get the next scene, which is Liz, and Liz has brought in a nanny. They've hired a nanny to prepare for Brian and Charlie's kid. And this whole episode is going to be centered around Liz, Charlie, and Brian. And because Ava goes into labor, you get an interesting dynamic, and there's a lot to explain as to what's going on there. But they bring in a nanny. The nanny is like just trying to give her uh, unbiased opinions, and they're basically like, and that's when Liz is basically like, what do you think, and all this stuff, and then it gets awkward, and Liz is like, okay, well, you can leave now, and then she says some crazy stuff to the nanny, future nanny, and Brian and them are like, oh, we hope you don't quit after just a day because of how crazy Liz can be and overbearing at times. So Ava is at a point right now where she could deliver a child at any day. Uh, Brian and Charlie are very excited. They've got the nursery, like they're all sitting in the nursery at this point, and they've got the nursery all decorated. They're ready to go. I mean, Brian and Charlie are so very happy, but you can also tell there's a lot of nerves, especially with Brian. Brian is very nervous about how he is going to be as a father, and uh, you can see that. You can see the tension building. Liz is kind of like that proud aunt that just wants it to happen so that she can give the baby love and also dictate everything that's going on in that kid's life. But she is 100% in. She wants to always be in control of things. And Brian and Charlie are kind of like, let's just take it day by day. Brian can do it. Um, you can figure it out. And then Ava's like, I'm so excited that you guys are going to be there to see the baby. Um, and then she announces that she's invited her mother too. So this is set up is setting up another interesting dynamic that's going to happen in this episode. But they end up adjourning their little meeting that they had, and then we get the next scene, which is going to be Sean and his ex, Marisol. Marisol, we find out, had cheated on Sean, and when he was, I think, serving in the military was when that happened. And she is so excited. She is oversharing everything. She talks about her new bra. She talks about it being sticky in there and all sorts of fun things. And then she's talking about her family as well. Sean's like, "You look great." She's like, "Thanks, you do too." He goes, obviously before we catch up, uh, she's like, it. He he really wants to forgive her for everything that has happened, and she wants to forgive him and they want to kind of reconcile. And I think Marisol is much more in tune of like, I just want to be back in your life. But she is still, as she explains, she goes, I don't have a job. She's kind of chaotic. She's like chaotic energy. I'm not sure she's really Sean's type. Like, it seems that he does love her, but I think it's kind of again, I think it's in How I Met Your Mother actually that it's mentioned where you kind of dating your ex is kind of like going back for something that you knew you already didn't like. And you get that sense of like Sean is trying to mend fences and he did love her and I think he still has some feeling for her. And but I don't know, it just doesn't seem like they're compatible and she is off the walls. And he is very calm and relaxed. So I don't know, it's a very interesting relationship. I feel like they're not headed for a long-term type of thing. I think he's just feeling those emotions. He's finally getting past certain feelings that he's had in the past. So that's led him back to her. And so then the next scene is when Jimmy and his father are saying goodbye. And then Jimmy's like, Randy, whenever you're back within the 30-mile radius, maybe you'll come see us again. And he's like, don't count on it. But kind of joking. But then he's like, all right, I'll see you soon, Jimbo. And then he leaves. Kind of gives him the pat on the shoulder. And Jimmy says, yeah, every September 16th, pretty much. His birthday. So it it shows that Randy's just not around. Doesn't really care to be around and doesn't even know that it would be around Jimmy's birthday or whatever. And so it's just very impersonal. The dad is just clearly not there for him. We get Paul, Jimmy, and Gabby walking on the trail, and uh, Jimmy is talking with Paul, and Paul's like, talking about the relationship with Lewis and how that was all coming together. And they're just trying to keep Paul's mind sharp, and he's trying to build kind of those building blocks of remaining healthy and what he's dealing with Parkinson's. And Gabby's like, "Well, I gotta go. I'm actually treating one of your patients." So Gabby has taken on Paul's patients as he's not able to kind of, and it's kind of setting up the fact that like Paul's not around to really care for his patients right now because they've kind of taken him out of it with the Parkinson's as he's trying to get back on track. And um, so there's that sense, and I think this scene really is just trying to set up the fact that like Gabby's taking on extra work. She's already feeling pretty burnt out, I think, from the work, and so that's what's being set up. You also have the issues of Jimmy's relationships with everybody right now just are not solid. I mean, the last solid one he has is the one relationship with a person that you would think he'd be the last person to have a relationship with. So I think that's another point they're trying to get across here is that Jimmy's relationships just are not strong right now, and he's really struggling to connect with people as he once had, and he's just trying to move past certain things. And I think in order for him to get further in these relationships and progress and to forgive, he's going to have to start to build on these relationships and try to get back to somewhat of a norm in these types of things. So I think that's what they're setting up with him. It's what it feels like throughout the episode is that he's just not in a good spot right now relationship wise. Then we get Derek and Brian going into a kid's store to pick out a car seat. And, Derek's talking about all sorts of things. And Brian's like, wait, I'm about to be a caring father. He's like, and Derek's having his issues with his kids. And he's talking about Matthew and how the fact that like they're just trying to get him back together and figure out like what's going on with their kid. And, is the kid ever going to be okay? And this whole scene is set up to show Brian's very nervous about being a father. He's like, what if I get it wrong? As most new parents usually do. Like, what if I'm a bad parent? Like, what if, he's going through all these scenarios in his head and he's like, what if I screw up? What? And, they're going through car seats and Derek's telling him which car seat to get. And Brian's kind of like, which one should I get? And what's happening? And then he gets a text and he's like, oh my God, Ava's in labor. So he goes freaking out and he goes, I'm having a baby. And then he's happy. But you could tell, like, building up to this, he's very nervous about being a father. He still is. And throughout this episode, it'll kind of come out that he is very nervous still. And then other things happen that really complicate things. But he's very nervous. Charlie's obviously going to be nervous. New parents are always nervous about bringing in the first kid. And Derek's just like, you never really figure parenting out. Like that's not something you're ever really gonna figure out. And he uses the example of his kid Matthew, who's 22 or 3, that he still has a kid, and he goes, I'm not sure that kid will ever figure it out. Because I think as a parent, and I'm not a parent, but I think as a parent, and you see this through every uh, iteration of parenting and parenthood and shows, is that it's not necessarily about being nervous. Is like being a parent, like, yeah, like you're gonna figure that stuff out. And I think eventually you start to get into that of like, yeah, I'll figure this out. But the biggest thing is like, I don't want to screw this kid up. Like, I think it's a big concern for parents. Is like, I don't want to fuck this up. Like, what if these kids are not? They don't turn out to be good humans, like good citizens. And Derek is even like yeah, like I'll admit to the fact that like we didn't necessarily do a great job with this one. I think we kind of screwed this up, but I think we're learning on how to fix this, and like we're trying every day. Like your parenting isn't done until your kid's dead or you're dead. Like oh, that sounded awful. Until you're dead or your kid is not really relying upon you. Obviously, I don't want your kid dying before you do, but again, I just feel like there are always so many things that happen with parents, new parents especially, where it's just nerves of the unknown. And it's really not until, and I don't think every parent ever figures this out, but from everything that I've ever heard or discussed with my own parents, is like you never figure it out. Like where you're still learning every day, even when you're 50 or 60, your kids are still your kids, and you're learning every single day. Brian's excited because like I'm having a kid, and Derek's like, "Congratulations!" They hug, and he goes, "No, this is all wrong. I wanted to be at a brunch, drunk with my best gays, having a great time, and I wanted there to be a line of support, kind of like the Jennifer Hudson show, where they're all clapping, cheering me on because I'm having a kid." And then Derek does the best thing, and I love Derek so much in this show. Derek's like, "All right, everybody," and everybody in the store, in this kid's store, baby store, and he goes, "Everybody, he's having a baby." And Brian's like, "I'm having a baby." And Derek's like, "I want you all to line up and cheer him out here. And I want you to give him what he wanted, like what he envisioned, 2 lines, Hudson style." And like Brian's like, "Hell yeah." So they're all cheering and clapping and come on. And they're all, and he's dancing through, and baby, he's having a baby. And like, it's so good. The people are so funny and very genuine about what's happening. And then we get to our theme song title card. But I love this scene. I love Derek so much. I mean, it was funny. I was listening to, I think it was a TikTok that I saw that was just like, Derek can do no wrong. Like Derek's our best, the best character in this whole show, and I do feel like he really is. Uh, and then Jimmy goes, "All right," and he's walking in, and he goes, "Oh, Alice, your old spaghetti, you left it out here from last night. I told you to clean it up." And it's old spaghetti, it's been out, and he's like, "Alice, no," and then he eats it. I was like, "That's so disgusting." He just starts eating spaghetti that's been out for like 12 hours probably at this point. But it's funny, and he gets a phone call, he answers it, and then Brian and Ava are at the hospital. She's in labor. It's a little bit early, but they're doing their thing. It's all going well. Brian's like, "It's going so well," and he is outside in the hall. He goes, "Oh my god, it's bad. It's like Cats, like the music, not the original." He's like, "It's so bad." And he goes, "I've never seen anything so gross in my life." He's like, "Everything's like bad, everything." And he goes, "I'm freaking out." And Brian or Jimmy's like, "Just be calm." He goes, "Can you come down here?" And he's like, "Yes, fine. I'll be there in a minute. Like, just chill. You need to be fine." And then he goes back in the room, and he's presented as like, "Oh, I'm fine. Everything's great." And Ava's telling him how, she can get more comfortable. Jimmy starts to head out, and he's going to the hospital to go see Brian, and bam, right behind him is Liz. Liz, "We're having a baby. We're having a baby." And she goes, "If she's crowning, you tell her to clench until I get there." Like Liz is freaking out. Jimmy's like, "What is going on? You're crazy, lady." And Liz is going to the hospital, Jimmy, which is chaos. But next scene, we get Gabby and Sean talking, and Sean's talking about Marisol, and we had learned in the episode or the scene before that Gabby had taken on all of Paul's patients, and Sean is Paul's patient. So Paul and Gabby now are seen as patient and therapist. So they're talking about it, and he's just like, it's pretty much like he loves her. It is, it's a good relationship, um, but I do. It seems like Marisol might be here for him to move forward a bit. It might be good to kind of rekindle that relationship. Is he avoiding it for reasons? I don't know. But like it definitely feels like he is kind of avoidant of what's going on, like that relationship. Like it feels very much like he wants to rekindle it. It didn't go well. It didn't end well the last time that they went through it, but also it could help him move on. So I don't know. It's a very interesting dynamic. It's a hard one to do because as a person, you would probably want to get it back into a relationship like that if you really cared for the person, but also it might not be the most healthy thing. But Gabby, kind of good advice, but honestly, I was kind of like, I don't know, man. Like sometimes it's just better to move on without actually having to move on and get back into that situation because it could just get worse. And then we get Paul talking with Julie, and they're talking about the fact that they're just trying to stay healthy. And then it says, and Alice is there, and they're just talking about what's going on with Paul and are you feeling better? And Alice is still, I don't think so, she's not really as patient, but she's going to Paul to get advice. And um I just feel like there is a point where the two of them are going to have to separate, or something bad, if something bad happens, Alice is going to be devastated. Like this is like almost like a grandfather figure to her, and somebody that really cares and genuinely cares about the well-being of Alice. And Alice is just like, how's your treatment going? And he's like, this is chaos, like this is awful, everything's awful, I'm always doing something here and there. Paul is very independent and not so much codependent. I think that's what's bothering Paul, and you can just tell he's getting more and more angsty about it. We then go to the hospital. Jimmy and Liz arrive, and Ava is talking about just natural childbirth and birthing a child. And Liz comes in, and then Liz basically takes the role of the nurse. She goes, "Have you gotten your what is it? Your geez, I'm blanking on the name of it. Uh, Epidural." And she's like, "No, I haven't." And she goes, "I don't know what crazy people said it was okay to have a natural birth because it's painful and you need your epidural." And because she's like, "Any strong opinions, Liz?" Or they're asking her, and she's like, she goes, "You need to get it. You need to do it." And he goes, she's like, "You're gonna suffer and it's gonna be painful and you're gonna be screaming in pain." And she goes, "All this stuff's happening." And like Liz is going full speed right at the issues. And it's funny because Brian's like, "Oh my god, everything I need to do so much. There's so much going on. I'm having a kid soon. I need to do this. I need to do that. The baby could be here any minute." Like freaking out. And Liz looks down underneath the covers and goes, "She's only 2.5 centimeters dilated." And the nurse goes, "How do you know that?" And Liz goes, Let me see what's going on." She's like asking for an update on her. She like grabs the rover and like brings it over and like looking at her chart. And the nurse like, "No, what are you doing? What the hell are you going on?" Jimmy's like, "I'm so sorry. We're gonna get her out of the room." So he grabs her, and because of the chaotic energy, Ava's like, "Can you get her out of here?" It's a lot of fun. Liz, Kristen Miller is so good. I love her. I'm rewatching Scrubs before the new Scrubs comes on. I love Kristen Miller, and I'm glad that she's in Shrinking because she's so great. But Jimmy's like, "What the hell is wrong with you?" And she goes, "Have you ever pushed a child out of your vagina before?" And he's like, "No." Or he goes, "I have pushed people out before." He goes, "Don't ask." And it was like, "What? What does that even mean?" But Jimmy is basically like, "You need to calm down. You need to." He's trying to get her to calm down because he's like, "There's a lot going on." But Brian's like, comes out of the room and he's still hot. He's still heated. And he's like, "I got so much to do. I got to get a car seat in the car. I got to do all this stuff." He goes, "That room still smells like an entire vagina." And he's like, "It smells in there and I'm scared." And you can just tell he's having that freak out moment. And they're just trying to get him to calm down and just breathe. And Jimmy's like, "There's a lot of crazy stuff going on." He goes, "You're going to see a lot of blood." He's trying to prepare Brian for what's going to happen. And he's telling you there's gonna be poop, be blood everywhere. Um, and Brian's like, "I just want to be at brunch." And then Jimmy goes, "But the one thing that we know when you leave that room is you're gonna be a dad." And that kind of calms his nerves a little bit because Brian's like, "I want to be a dad." And then he texted Stewart, I think, who is the adoption attorney, and he's like, that, or I cannot figure out what his job is, but I think he's the adoption attorney. And he's like, that is going to be a father and the first father in the history to die during childbirth. He had texted that over to him. And I was like, that was such a good moment. But Stewart is basically like, "Yeah, there's a problem." And it's like, "Oh, here we go. Here's the setup." So Stewart informs Brian that Ava has yet to sign the paperwork, the adoption paperwork. And so He says that he has seen this multiple times, many a times with adoption cases where when the mother's kind of hesitant on whether they're gonna actually going to give the child up for adoption, they start to delay it a little bit, and that's not the news that they want to hear, obviously. And Brian's like, "I'm so ready to be a dad." And it's really funny because Liz is like, "Wait till the anesthesia pops in, and then get her to sign it." And they're like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa!" Stuart's like, "Whoa," and he goes, "I mean, it makes sense. Like, when she's in as much pain as possible, when she doesn't want this kid, have her sign it, and then you know maybe she'll regret it after." But she has to come to the decision on her own. They can't really force her to obviously give up this kid for adoption. It is her choice after all. And uh, this will be an ongoing thing and concern throughout the episode. And uh, Liz goes, "I'm going to leave this hospital with baby no matter what happens." And Stuart's like, "I can't be a part of this." So that was a really good moment. Um, but yeah, that's kind of what we've set up for the whole episode. It's going to be like the biggest the conflict in this episode is the fact that Ava still has not signed over the paperwork to give the kid over to Brian and Charlie. Um, Alice then goes to after she has a quick run in with Sean, she gets like Paul sugar packets because he needs something sweet as payment, and he goes. Alice goes to the bench and to talk to Paul, and Paul's like, "I got a burner so that Julie can't track me and know where I am at all the times, and knows what I'm doing and what calls I make." But Alice gives payment over to Paul, and so Alice is like, "So graduation's coming up, and I want to invite my grandpa, but I know my dad wouldn't like that." And uh, Paul basically advises her is like, "The stuff that your dad is going through with your grandfather is not what should impact your relationship with your grandfather. Your stuff is your stuff." He says your or Jimmy's shit with his father is Jimmy's shit with his father. And so he's trying to advise the fact that like if you feel like you that is something you want to do, you should not let your father, like obviously your father's emotions and stuff is going to be something you take into consideration, but he should also know that it shouldn't really impact, like if the grandfather, if like they feel close enough and have a good enough relationship, that it would be good to invite him. And so that's a good moment. Like I feel like so much of this conversation is, and this is a lot of like what Jimmy and them are going through right now, especially with Tia's death and stuff, is that they're figuring out that um relationships are between two people, and when you involve another person to dictate what's going on in that relationship, sometimes that can get messy because you know people have different relationships with one another, and it's hard, especially as a kid, to try to go back. I wouldn't say but going behind your back as a kid like with their parent like this is necessarily a good thing, but like it is. Alice is going to have to take into consideration how Jimmy feels about this, and then Jimmy's going to have to take into consideration that Alice has a good relationship and doesn't really have a reason to really hate her grandfather. He's been around more for her. Uh, I get that Jimmy, she wasn't, or he wasn't really around for, but that doesn't really impact how Alice and him have a relationship. So, very interesting character building there and dynamic. And I think we're going to get more and more of Randy this season based off of just that conversation alone. But Jimmy starts to talk to Ava back at the hospital, and they're talking about, the kid, and then he's trying to ease her way into it and have a good conversation with her, and signing that. It eventually comes up like, this kid, they're trying to beat around the bush a little bit, but also trying to get her to admit that like she hasn't signed the paper yet, and that they're trying to tiptoe around the subject of the paperwork. And so they're talking about the birth and like what's going to happen. Jimmy's trying to comfort her, and then Alice is kind of like trying to comfort her, but it has that same kind, or not Alice, Liz is trying to have that same conversation with her as well. But then Brian very awkwardly is like, you know, when you're going through a birth like this, like I know they tell you to go through like a checklist. Maybe there's something you've forgotten that make you feel a little bit more comfortable that you've forgotten it. And if you do this one thing, and basically he's insinuating you forgot to sign the papers. Are you going to sign the papers? Um, and then he gets in the fact that like they're installing the chair in the car, and if they're not going to be taking home a baby, maybe they shouldn't really have to do the car. And so that, Brian's just trying to be like, "Hey, lady, you haven't signed the paperwork yet." And I don't think Ava really catches on at first of what she's trying to do. Then a nurse, Kimmy, walks in and she is very upbeat, very positive, very high energy. And she's like, I heard there was a really scary lady in here. And she thought it was Ava, the mother, the birthing mother. It was not, it was Liz. And she goes, nope, I'm the one right here. Liz, I'm the crazy one. And Kimmy's like, yeah, okay, I could see that. And Jimmy goes, like Liz Zilla, like Godzilla. And then Kimmy's like, that's funny. And then we start this stretch of Kimmy just laughing at everything that Jimmy says. Jimmy's the funniest guy. You can tell that Kimmy clearly has a crush on Jimmy, and that's going to keep building throughout the episode. Gabby's back at the office talking with her other patient, who's been like the ongoing patient that she's been talking to, who basically doesn't really have that much to really offer Gabby. And I think that's why Gabby's kind of just like, I'm stuck in the mundane. Like everything we talk about, there's nothing too genuine about what's going on. She goes, you worry about shit that you shouldn't worry about, basically. Like, why am I wasting my time with you? I think Gabby, it's just showing Gabby is getting very burnt out on just patients. She doesn't feel like there's really much she can offer them because it's just not really up to the standards of what she would normally want to do. Then we go to Derek sitting in the car, putting in the car seat with Brian. And again, they're having that conversation of like, I wanted something special to happen today. I want to be a father, but I'm also nervous about being a father. And Derek's just like, you know, things are going to happen like this where, life and being a father isn't always going to be what you want it to be. Um, he's like, Ava might decide to keep the baby. And he said that, just kind of looking at his, things happen. Basically, Derek is saying things happen. Um, if you believe something's going to happen the way it's going to believe and then it lets you down, like that doesn't mean like necessarily it was a failure or anything like that, but you you will learn to move on. You will learn to accept the different things that are happening and that you can't control everything. And when you're having this kid, like you shouldn't try to control everything because things are unpredictable, in a sense. We go back up into the hospital room. Kimmy's taking care of Ava, who is getting closer and closer to being able to deliver this child. Jimmy continues to make jokes. He says, "Clean up on aisle 7." And the little, it's the clicker that you click if you want assistance from a nurse or you want more morphine. Like, it was a, it's the clicker to call white, basically. Um, Kimmy continues to laugh at everything Jimmy says, and Jimmy's like, "No, she's not laughing. She's not flirting with me." And Liz and Ava are like, "Dude, nothing you have said is funny, and she's laughing at you because she liked you, not because you're funny." And Jimmy's like, "No, I'm funny." He goes, "Plus, I wouldn't even consider it. Jimmy and Kimmy, that whole thing, that's weird. Why would that won't work? I feel like that's strange." Then they start talking about Sophie a little bit. He's like, he just you can tell that Jimmy is still not ready to move on in that sense romantically, and I think this whole season is going to be built on just and I think by the end of the season, we finally get him going on a date or, like, dating somebody else. I don't think we're gonna get him dating someone throughout the season, but I do think by the end of it, it's building up to the fact that, like, Jimmy's going to move on. He's looking for reasons not to, like someone and they say, and he brings up her laugh and the fact that her name's Kimmy, and he goes, Liz is basically like, you are always looking for reasons not to fall for someone because you're afraid of moving on past Tia. And yeah, it's it's pretty bad for Jimmy just because like you want him to move on and you want him to be happy, but I don't think he can be just yet. Uh Alice goes and gets Gabby. Because Paul's like, we need to get Gabby over here because I feel like she can offer you some things that maybe necessarily I can't. But what he's doing is he's passing Alice on to Gabby because he goes, not only was it your mother, but it was your best friend. You two need to talk to each other because I feel like you two can start to move on together if you both talk about a common thing that is making you both very upset, and that is Tia and Tia's death. So Paul hands Alice over to Gabby, and Gabby and Alice, I think, are going to start to build this relationship of them talking about what's going on. But um, again, I think Paul can only give so much, right? Paul can only do so much, especially as he gets further and further into his journey with Parkinson's. I think it's going to be a lot more difficult, and he leaves them to talk. And again, I think this is perfect because Gabby and Alice are going to be able to bounce things off of each other about what they miss so much about Tia. Then we get back to the hospital. Jimmy and Liz are talking at the vending machines, and Jimmy's like, "People fall out of love. Somebody cheats. Bad things happen. Somebody dies." And you know, he's just not ready to be able to handle another bad thing happening in his life, especially with somebody that he loves. And he, again, I don't think he can deal with that trauma. And he makes that very clear. And I think it was a very interesting point to be made. It was a pretty quick scene, but Liz is like, I've been kind of going through something similar with my kid, Matthew, and like, we've been trying to get him to move on. And she's like, I remember when one time he was 9, he wanted to ride a skateboard down a ramp. He'd climb up to the top, totally freeze, and not be able to do it. He never wanted to do something so badly, but he was never able to get himself to do it. He would stand there and watch all the other kids riding by doing it, but he was never able to take that next jump, that next part of life. He's never been able to push himself forward to enjoy the other things that kids were enjoying. And she goes, that's kind of what you're in, like where you're afraid. You're afraid to get back out there, and you're afraid to get hurt. You're afraid to have something happen in life where you're just not comfortable taking that chance again, that something bad could happen, that, you know, like Matthew, you need a push, because she goes, I pushed him, and then he was able to do what he wanted to do, and he was having that fun and great time in his life because she gave him that push he needed. Meanwhile, she had walked him all the way, Jimmy, up to the nurse's station, and there was Kimmy. And they have a little moment like, hey, I like your necklace. Kimmy's like, oh, thank you. And Jimmy's like, what did the T stand for? And she laughs and he goes, that wasn't, and you can see Liz, and she goes, that wasn't that funny. But he goes, you want to grab some coffee sometime? And she goes, sure. So Jimmy taking a step, right? But I don't think ready for a real relationship. And I think we're going to get that built out throughout the whole season. It's just the fact that he's going to get to a point where he's ready for a real relationship. And I'm hoping it's with Sophie. But um, Brian and Ava having a good moment in the room where he's talking about the fact that, he's just, are you nervous and that kind of stuff. And she goes, I really appreciate you guys being so kind to me, really taking me in as a friend, kind of like a family member. And she goes, I've never really had that support as much. And my mother was kind of weird about the situation that I'm in. She goes, "Are you okay?" And he goes, "No, I'm good." He goes, the only thing I care about right now is that you're okay." And really checking in with Ava and having more of a personal connection. He's not as worried about the adoption papers right away when he's talking to her. He starts to take care of her. And then he goes over to get, and he goes, "Do you need some ice chips?" And she's like, "Yeah, sure." And he goes over and she's signed the adoption papers. And she goes, "I'm sorry. I just, I had a moment and I've been trying." And he goes, "I've been trying to get through this moment too. I didn't want to show you that I was upset, but I was upset because the adoption papers weren't signed." And she goes, "No, I totally get it." She goes, "I just have a lot of going on in my mind. And there's a lot of pressure from my mom, but also it's like, I don't know how I was going to feel. I don't know how I'm going to feel, but I do know that I want you to be the father." And she goes, I want to be around, but like, obviously she understands the situation. And Brian's like, "Ava, you're the best. Like, you're a kind, gentle, generous gift of a person to give us this child, to birth this child for us." And they're grateful. Charlie and Brian are grateful that she'd chosen them to be the fathers. And she's very happy with her decision. And then she starts to go into labor. And then Brian, she goes, "It's happening." He goes, uh, "Oh, you're becoming a good, or I'm becoming a good person." She goes, "No, I think I'm birthing a child." So that starts to happen. And then we get another scene with Sean and his girlfriend. Um, and again, Marisol confronts him about, like, "Why are you acting so weird?" And he goes, you know, I'm trying to get past this. I'm trying to move on." And Brian's like, "I was so mean to you. I said some other things I should said to another person, let alone someone they love." And he goes, I pushed you away and it was awful. And I'm so sorry for the way I treated you." And she goes, "I dumped you while you were overseas. Do you know why? Because I was like 19-year-old bartender told me I look like Latina Anne Hathaway," which the girl does look like a Latina Anne Hathaway. But she goes, but again, she's like, "You were kind of a dick, and like we grew apart, and I decided to go with somebody else." And I think both of them had their issues. I think both of them were mean to one another. I think it was not a great relationship. It did not end on good terms, but they both seemed to be coming to an agreement that both of them were shitty people to each other. And so they both come to this realization and they apologize. And they do this thing where they say koala, and then she goes koala, and they hug, and then they kiss. So it seems that they are on the mend, and they're fixing that relationship. But it sounds like both of them were in the wrong. She took it to another step and started seeing someone else. I think she sleeps with someone else, cheats on him technically, but both of them were in bad situations, bad spots. And then you see that they're going to make up and be fine. And now we'll get Marisol, I think, more in this show. The next scene is Gabby sitting with Paul, and they're kind of talking through what's been going on. Um, and uh, Paul is starting to get, I think, to a realization of like, is he going to be able to do the work, continue to do the work that he once loved, where he is a therapist at times, or all the time in his work. And I think he's come to the realization that like life is changing for him, and he's going to have major struggles, and that uh, bad things are happening to him. And as time goes on, he feels like he might not be able to cope and handle that. And Gabby's basically like, "We're going to be here for you. Like people will be here for you." They then go to the hospital. Everybody's there, and the baby has been born. um, Skin to skin contact is eventually going to be needed. Liz is like, I call that, and they're like, that's weird. What the fuck are you talking about? Liz is just continues to be weird. Gabby says, I want to eat your face. Liz is like, I want to eat your face too to the baby, and, and Brian's like, okay, kind of strange. But then Gabby takes the baby and hands him over to Paul, and Paul is holding the child as the show comes to an end. The episode comes to an end. Paul is holding the kid, um, seeing new life, the hope of new life. And I think in that moment, he's really starting to realize that like all these people are always going to be around to love him. And I think there's a like really cool moment because he's looking down at the baby. Baby's looking up at him, and he goes, enjoy the ride. And it's such a cool moment because it's showing again like the circle of life kind of thing, and not eating one another and killing each other, but the circle of life of meaning like it's a cycle. New baby born, Paul approaching an age where you start to think about, especially with his battle with Parkinson's, you start to think about end of life and life. He's reflecting on everything that's been great in his life, and I think that's something that he in this episode subtly is trying to deal with the fact that like he knows that death is closer than living at this point. I mean, at this point in life, he is I think upwards of probably 70 or 80, and he is approaching a time in his life where he is starting to go. And here's this baby new of life, and everything is ahead of them where everything's behind Paul. I think he's been trying to kind of cope with this, and he's not really made it a statement until he was talking to Gabby in that last scene with him and Gabby when they were back at his house, where he's basically saying that life is fleeting, and he feels like he's losing touch and losing control and losing the things that he's always loved to do. And Gabby's like, no, we're here with you, we'll be by you, by your side until the very end. And and he has it's a really cool shot because they're all standing in the hospital room around Ava, who has just had the baby. And as Paul's holding the baby and he looks up from the baby and he sees everybody that is a supporting cast in his life standing there, he's like, this kid is going to have that same support system, and you're lucky. So what a cool moment. A good episode, a great ending. I really like this ending, but the episode, it was good. It was quick. Didn't have a whole lot of substance in it, but I think the idea of Jimmy trying to deal with moving on, Sean trying to deal with moving on, Brian overcoming the fear that he has of being a new dad, Derek comforting him and ushering him into being a new dad, as a friend, as somebody that has been there and also feels like he has had his failures. So Brian shouldn't be afraid to have his own, because there are failures that are going to happen when you're raising a kid. It's just normal, natural in life. And then Paul realizing that while it might feel like he's alone at times, especially fighting this thing, that he's not really alone. He's got that supporting cast, and uh, he's lucky to have been so fortunate in life to have such a good supporting cast. And I think he's realizing that and coming to terms with the fact that the end is probably closer than he wants it to be, but he is facing the reality of battling such an awful disease. So very good episode. Again, like I said, not the greatest, but I thought did a really nice job. It was 8.1 on IMDb, so people really liked it still. I still think it's one of the more powerful shows on TV, and I just love all the people that work on this show. So overall, a very good episode. Um, Not one of my favorites, but a very solid one. So thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. I know it's kind of rambling on. I was trying to watch some of it back because, again, it was a lot more of the same conversations happening over and over again of them just trying to deal with grief and how everybody deals with that. But pretty solid episode. I appreciate you all listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you've gotten this far, you can find us over on the Screen Society podcast on socials, X, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. I'll try to post them more over on TikTok eventually. But yeah, rate, like, subscribe on comment on YouTube channel helps people find us that also like the show Shrinking, but also helps people find us over on Spotify as well. When you like, subscribe, and share the episodes. So if you like the audio video versions, make sure to head over there and turn on the notifications so that way you get notified when the new episodes drop. But we will see you next time when we will be talking season 3, episode 4 of Shrinking. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And we'll see you in the next episode.